Hello everyone, it's Dio from Venthyr Gaming, bringing you another World of Warcraft video. In this guide, we are bringing you a Venthyr Fury Warrior. So for those that are unfamiliar with the Fury Warrior, it uses two two-handers. It has constant damage. It's not as bursty as like Boomkin's mages and those sorts of things. It does have a couple burst windows with based off recklessness. It is very good at putting out damage during execute phases. So the Venthyr, because of our covenant with Condemn, we are able to execute targets that are above 80% and below 35%. So we have two execute windows. And during those periods, our single target DPS really soars. And with using Signet of Tormented Kings for like Mythic Plus, our AoE damage can be quite significant as well as we get to utilize Whirlwind, which I'll get into more in a little bit. So for those who are unfamiliar with the Fury Warrior, a little bit of the fundamentals are, let's just pull up the spellbook. So we are a build and spend class, so that means we build our rage and then we spend it. And we are basically, we want to be enraged as much as possible. So enrage is a passive here where when we're enraged, we deal more damage. So here I deal 35% more damage. This is based on my mastery. We gain 15% haste and 10% movement speed. Bloodthirst has a 45% chance to enrage you, but this is only because of I am using fresh meat. It took me a second to find it there. Because fresh meat adds that extra 15%, otherwise it'll just 30% off Bloodthirst. And then we also use Rampage to give us an instant enrage. So basically, as I was just saying there, we want to be enraged as much as possible. So we want to use our ability Bloodthirst to try to proc it off that 30 to 45% chance. Or if we have 80 rage, we can spend Rampage to instantly enrage us. Additionally, we have two main cooldowns that we have. So we have recklessness. So this causes us to go berserk, increasing all rage regeneration by 100% and granting your abilities 20% increased critical strike. So basically, while Rec is up, we gain twice as much rage, which helps us do more rampages, or during execute phases, lets us do more condemns. And also, if we are using the talent of anger management, which most will, every time we spend 20 rage, it reduces the remaining cooldown on recklessness. So basically, during Rec, with the increased rage regeneration, we're helping bringing that off cooldown. It's a cooldown on for a minute and a half, but with anger management, it is closer to a minute, and during execute phases, and if you have heroism, it's closer between 40 to 45 seconds. So that's pretty good. And then, of course, we also have Blade Storm, so this is a good AoE damage ability. So you just basically spin in a circle, striking up to 8 nearby targets for a certain 10,000 physical damage here. You're immune to movement impairing and loss of control effects, but you can use defensive abilities and avoid attacks. So if you're doing Mythic Plus, like I do, then with Signet of Tormented Kings, it also has a chance to proc either Recklessness or Avatar. Similarly with Recklessness, when you use it, it could proc Avatar or Bladestorm. So this is how we deal most of our damage, and I'll go over the rotation a little bit later. So other than that, what we also want to do is one thing to note is because we have a Whirlwind, so I just used it there. So Whirlwind, the key to Whirlwind would be is when you use it, your next single target strikes up to 4 additional targets for 45% damage, and it applies for, you have 2 stacks of that. So this is for AoE. So when you have at least 2 mobs, or 2 or more, if you will, you want to have Whirlwind into your rotation. So it is basically every third ability you use will be Whirlwind to proc those 2 buffs, so you're hitting multiples at the same time. So why would you pick a Venthyr Warrior? So Venthyr Warriors are particularly popular in PvP. So if you are a PvPer, but you also want to do some PvE content, you may need to be a Venthyr just to get the Condemn ability. So as mentioned, Condemn is replaces the execute, so we can now execute targets that are above 80% or below 35. Incredibly useful in PvP. So if you want to do that, the most people will be Venthyr if they're the PvP, like I said. But Venthyr is also pretty good DPS, pretty solid DPS for both single target rating, as well as in Mythic Plus, it does extremely well as well. I do want to mention that the other ability you get for being a Venthyr is Door of Shadows, which basically lets you just warp there, which can be handy in PvP for some extra mobility as well as in raid. And for Mythic Plus, it helps you with some skips that you need to do as well. For the legendaries, I'm only going to be talking about the PVE legendaries. I don't PvP as Fury, so I don't want to cover that as I would not be well informed enough for you guys. So for the PVE legendaries, there are really only two options. So for Mythic Plus, Signet of the Tormented Kings is what we'll want to use. And so this basically, when we activate Bladestorm or Recklessness or Avatar's an arms one, so it doesn't really count for us as Fury. So when we use Bladestorm or Recklessness, it has a random chance to cast one of the other two abilities at reduced effectiveness. So if we cast Wreck, we might get Bladestorm. Let's just cast it here. Yep, there we get Bladestorm, and it lasts for about 4 seconds. And alternately, if we cast Bladestorm, what did we gain there? We got Wrecked again, so it just increased our time there. So basically, that's what it does for us, and is incredibly useful for Mythic Plus because we get that additional bonus. You have a random chance of getting one of the other two, as the ability indicates. So it has high burst potential, especially if it procs. If you do Recklessness first and you proc Avatar, and then you get to pop Bladestorm, you get the added bonus of the Avatar damage onto your Bladestorm, which is incredibly useful during AoE pulls, or alternately during execute phases if you get the Avatar, or you can use Bladestorm during an execute phase if Wreck is down to potentially proc a Wreck period, or just give you Avatar as well. For a rating situation, I actually haven't made the legendary yet, but what you would have is you would go with Sinful Surge. So Sinful Surge is that Condemn extends the duration of Recklessness by 2 seconds. So Recklessness lasts 15.5 seconds. And so basically every time we cast Condemn, so when we get an execute, it extends 2 seconds. During Recklessness at the start of an encounter during an execute phase, every third ability of Recklessness is execute. So a GCD is like a second and a half, give or take. So that means every 4.5 seconds, we're adding 2 seconds to it. So let's just simplify. Let's pretend Rec is 16 seconds and that the GCD would be 4 seconds instead. So that would mean we're going to add 8 seconds to it. So really, though, that would have been like 50% added value, but as we know, it's a little bit not quite like that. So we're probably going to be adding like 35% of the duration to Recklessness here, because we'll probably get 3, maybe 4 executes off, which will add the 8 seconds if with the increased duration. So it's actually pretty handy there. It's a pretty powerful legendary for rating, and adds quite significant value. For the Soulbind, we are going to be using Naja the Mistblade. So, and the reason that we're using Najia, I said that wrong the first time, is basically because we're going to gain Thrill Seeker. So while in combat, you gain a stack of Thrill Seeker every 2 seconds, or 4 stacks on killing an enemy. At 40 stacks, you consume it to grant Euphoria, increasing your haste by 20% for 10 seconds. This does decay while you're not in combat, so this is a nice DPS boost that's up fairly frequently. Additionally, let's see, we get Door Shadows will disorient when you do it on top of people, so you can do that to interrupt a caster if you're out of kicks or they're at range and you need to close the gap. You lose 20%, that's not really relevant, it's just you automatically get that. Do we have Daunting Duelist? The first enemy you damage in combat is marked as your adversary. You deal 3% more damage to them, and they deal 1.5% less damage to you. You may only have one adversary at a time. So this is pretty handy for raiding. So you, obviously you largely only have one target there, and it's the first one you're attacking. So you get an extra 3% damage to them during that. Also good for Mythic Plus bosses or big trash pulls where there is one high health mob. You'll hit them first, so you always have, they'll be alive the longest, so you always have that additional 3% damage to them. We're also going to take Sinful Preservation, so health potions and health stones grant you an absorb shield equal to 50% of the amount healed for 20 seconds. And then lastly, Fatal Flaw. When the haste effect of Euphoria ends, you gain 10 seconds of either 20% increased critical strike or versatility, whichever you currently have more of. Because of how our stats go, is most likely always going to be critical strike, because our stat priority is haste, mastery, then critical strike, and then versatility. So I did glance over, or hadn't yet covered, the actual conduits that we're going to use. So we're going to use Depths of Insanity. So this causes recklessness to last longer. We also want to use Inspiring Presence. So our Rallying Cry, the duration and the health is increased. So just a helpful party or raid CD. Also using the cooldown Stalwart Guardian to reduce the cooldown of Enraged Regeneration, just in case you need to self-heal. So basically, Enraged Regeneration is, of course, reduces damage taken by 30%, and Bloodthirst restores an additional 20% health, and you can use it while stunned. So it's also a way to heal, as well as I mentioned there, a defensive with the 30% cooldown reduction, or not cooldown, 30% damage reduction, sorry. Also using safeguards, so intervene reduces damage taken by the target by 15 seconds. So in Mythic Plus or raids, if somebody gets a dot applied to them or are looking weak, and you can easily just intervene them and it reduces the damage. You have to be careful though if there is melee hits that are being applied to the target. If you're within, I believe it's 8 yards. Within 10 yards, if you're within 10 yards of the people and they're taking melee hits, the damage is redirected to you. So just be aware of that. Don't accidentally intervene the tank or something like that. Then you'll be taking all the melee hits from the bosses. We're also using Ashen Juggernaut. So Condemn increases the critical strike chance of Condemn by 2% for 8 seconds, and it stacks for up to 8 times. So that is incredibly useful during execute phases. You'll quickly get to the maximum percent there, and it will last for the duration of the execute period. And then lastly, this is kind of interchangeable here. So I'm using Disturb the Peace, which is just reduces the cooldown of Piercing Howl. Alternately, you could also use Cacophorous Roar. I know I pronounced that wrong. I just can't talk this morning. And this basically does Intimidating Shout can withstand 140% more damage before breaking. So again, we pick Nagia, and this is just due to Thrill Seeker as well as the Fatal Flaw and also Dauntless Duelist. The DPS that these three, I guess I'm going to call them conduit slots, add is pretty phenomenal, and this is why it is the best Soulbind for us as a Venthyr Fury. So the talents of the Fury Warrior do change a little bit based on whether you are raiding or doing Mythic Plus. So currently I have my Mythic Plus talents in here. So the Mythic Plus talents are as follows. You want fresh meat. So Bloodthirst always enrages you the first time you strike a target, and it has a 15% increased chance to trigger Enrage. So you want this for when you have your big AoE pulls and there's multiple mobs, so you can go around and hit the different targets to always proc your fresh meat. So for example, I'm just going to walk over here, and there I hit it with the, now it's got the debuff for fresh meat, and now I'm enraged. I can go over to this guy and do the same thing, get instant enrage procs. There's two different ones that you could pick on the next tier here. So some use double time, so it just increases your charge, gives you an extra one. I prefer Stormbolt as a stun and interrupt, so that's why I use that. We, of course, are taking Massacre, so Condemn is now usable on targets below 35% health, and its cooldown is reduced by 1.5%, so it helps us spam that more. We are also going to use War Paint. You take 10% reduced damage while Enrage is active. We're going to use Cruelty. While enraged, Raging Blow deals 20% more damage, and it has a 30% chance to instantly reset its own cooldown. And now we're going to use Bladestorm for this one, because this helps in Mythic Plus for AoE pulls. Also, it works with our Signet of Tormented Kings. And so you become unstoppable, and you strike up to 8 enemies for dealing 10,000 damage over 3 seconds. And then lastly, we're taking Anger Management. So every 20 rage you spend reduces the remaining cooldown on Recklessness by 1 second. So this takes our 1.5-minute cooldown and brings it down to a minute during regular periods and down to 40 or 45 seconds during execute periods. Now for raiding, the build is pretty much the same. The only difference would be is you take Sudden Death over Fresh Meat. So your attacks have a chance to reset the cooldown of Condemn and make it usable on any target regardless of their health. And that is basically the only change. I guess you could take the double charge is probably better in the raiding situation because there's not many things that you can stun. So taking double time there would be the more useful talent. Otherwise, it is the same. And then, of course, our legendary we would change out to be Sinful Surge. Yeah, and that's basically the only difference between the M plus and the rating build. So there are two rotations for a Fury Warrior. One is for single target and one is for AoE. So first we're going to cover single target and we're going to focus on during recklessness and during a execute phase. So during that phase, it is a 3-button rotation. We want to pop Enrage, and then we want to use execute, and then we want to use Raging Blow. Of course, first we want to be enraged before we pop recklessness. So I'm just going to show what it looks like here. So we're going to charge in. There, we're enraged. So now we're going to pop recklessness. And so now we got our rotation going here of our 3 buttons. So we're going to enrage, execute, raging blow, enrage, execute, raging blow, enrage, execute, raging blow. So that's our 3-button rotation there. So for our single target rotation during non-rec periods, we're going to want to be enraged. And while we are enraged, the single target rotation is going to look like this. So you're going to reapply Enrage with Rampage, and then we're going to do Raging Blow, and then we're going to do Bloodthirst, followed by Whirlwind as a filler, only if Raging Blow and Bloodthirst are on CD. Otherwise, we want to do Rampage, Raging Blow, Bloodthirst, and be enraged as much as possible. So, and how our rotation chart changes if we are not enraged is basically if we have the rage, so if we have the 80 rage, we cast Rampage. Otherwise, we cast Bloodthirst, and then we cast Raging Blow, and then we do Whirlwind as filler to generate rage. So because we want to be enraged, we want to get there. So we're going to, if we have the rage available, like I said, Rampage. If the rage is not available, Bloodthirst on CD as soon as it is available, and then Raging Blow and Whirlwind as fillers between Bloodthirst coming off CD, waiting to try proc and rage again, or accumulating the 80 rage to cast Rampage. One last thing I want to cover before we move on to the AoE rotation is if we are running Sudden Death and we get a Condemn proc, you want to use that ASAP. The only thing that you will want to hold back on a second on it is if your next attack is going to enrage you. So if you have a Rampage that would have be that you have the rage to spend, you want to spend the rage to get the Rampage. So you want to use Rampage to get the Enraged buff, and then you want to use your Condemn proc for maximum damage. That'll be the only change in the rotations is when you get that proc. Same with if you are not enraged and trying to build it, if you don't have the rage and Bloodthirst is on CD, but you get a proc and it doesn't look like Bloodthirst is going to come off CD anytime soon, or the Raging Blow you're about to cast is not going to free up or give you enough rage for the Rampage, then you'll just want to use your execute your Condemn proc. So for the AoE rotation, it is basically the same as single target. The only difference is going to be is that every third ability we use is going to be Whirlwind. And of course, I'm just going to go up here and Whirlwind's target again, just so everybody knows. So it's because Whirlwind gives you a 2-stack buff of your next single target attack strikes up to 4 additional targets for 45% damage. So we want to use that every third ability to be able to hit multiple targets with all of our spells. So our rotation doesn't change. It's the same as single target. We're just throwing in Whirlwind every third attack. One important thing to note, and this was a big game changer for me finding this out, is when you're first doing a pull, is you want to charge into the pull and you want to cast Whirlwind on your way in, and you just want to cleave like the first target. So as we're going to go in here, we're going to charge and cast Whirlwind at the same time. So we start the pull with Whirlwind up, and so the first time we cast our Bloodthirst, it's hitting 2 targets, or if we have an execute that's available, like so you're hitting multiple targets right off the start. It just starts your DPS off much better. It's more smooth, and also you're building more rage. So that is what you want to do on your opener on an AoE pull. Otherwise, like I said, the only difference in between your single target rotation and your AoE rotation is you're using Whirlwind on every third ability. And of course, if we're using Signet of Tormented Kings, the difference also becomes is that you will not be canceling Bladestorm. So during single target, if you proc a Bladestorm, off here, we'll just go up here. Did I get it? No. So of course I didn't get it there. But if we were to get a Bladestorm, because execute is going to become available, we want to cancel Bladestorm early so we can keep executing, as well as or cast Rampage, because the damage from Bladestorm is not more significant than a Rampage or an execute. In an AoE pull, obviously we want to let Bladestorm run its course, and we want to try to get a Whirlwind off before we Bladestorm, as well as we also want to make sure we are enraged before we Bladestorm as well to maximize the damage. And that's the only difference between the single target and the OE, is just every third ability is the Whirlwind. And of course, we are not canceling Bladestorm. And like I just said, we want to be enraged before we cast the Bladestorm. This concludes our Venthyr Fury Warrior guide. If you have any questions or comments, please let us know below. If you have any tips or tricks that you're using, please let us know as well. We'd love to learn something new. As always, we appreciate any likes and subscribes. And of course, you can find us on Twitch. Have a good one.